Welcome friends to the second part of the series on relational database architecture. If you have not already checked out the first video of this series, be sure to check it out over here so that you have a good understanding of relational databases as well as the three different types of relationships. Alright, so now let's move on with this video where we'll be looking into the 5 simple steps you need to take in order to create efficient relational database architecture. Alright, so step number 1 is to define the problem/function of your app. So first, we need to identify the problem we want to solve or the function that we want our app to perform. For this example, let's say we want to create an app with functions like a book repository, where the user is able to search for a book and it will in turn return the data about that book. So now we know what our app exactly is, and now we can move on to step number 2, which is to define our data. Now that we know our problem and function, we next have to define what data our app needs. For our book repository, we really only need data about books and maybe some data about the authors as well. So let's list down all the possible book and author data that we'll need. So I've created a list of all the possible fields that comes with a book, as well as all the possible fields or data fields that the author needs. So for a book will usually have a title, a unique ISBN number, and possible author or authors. The book may also have multiple editions of the book as well, and obviously a book will have publishers as well as the published date of when the book was published. And we can also add an additional language field of what language the book was written in. And for the authors, each author will have a name, a country, and a birth date. So this is all the data that I will need in my app, and I want to show it to the users as well. Awesome, so now that we know the data that we need, let us move on to the next step, the third step, which is to organize our data. Organizing our data helps in categorizing and structuring the data in a logical way. Let's try to organize our data now. For this specific example, our data is actually quite simplistic and simple. You can see that it is actually sufficient to group the data into books and authors, which we have already done. However, we can also try to look deeper into our data, and we can notice that the edition, publisher, and published date fields of our book seem to be linked in a way such that for each edition of the book, it could have a specific publisher as well as a specific published date for that specific edition. So one edition is published by a publisher at the published date. So we should actually try to group these 3 fields together and think of them as sort of a group of data which are linked together. So now we have an additional group of data called editions, with the edition number, publisher, as well as published date. And we should keep this in mind as we move on to our 4th step, which is to relate our data. So step number 4, relate your data. In this step, we define the relationships between our data and determine how each piece of data is connected using the 3 types of relationships: one-to-one, one-to-many, and many-to-many relationships. So these relationships were previously discussed in our previous video. If you haven't checked it out, I implore you to do so. You need to know what these relationships are. So a good trick here is to look at the table with the most number of fields, which in this case is our books table, and examine each field, keeping a lookout for which fields are plural, i.e. they are definitely not a one-to-one relationship. So let's go ahead and zoom into our books table now. So our first field is the title field. We know that the title is unique to each book, so this is a one-to-one relationship. And the next field is the ISBN number for the book. Here, the ISBN number is definitely unique for each and every single one of our books, so this is definitely a one-to-one relationship as well. And now here is where it gets interesting with the third field, which is our authors field. We know that one book can be co-authored by more than one author. So here, the authors field is not unique to one book, as one book can be written by multiple authors. So now we know that it is definitely not a one-to-one relationship, and is either a one-to-many or many-to-many relationship. But notice that one author can also write multiple books. So in this case, it is the third type of relationship, which is a many-to-many relationship between books and authors. Now moving on to the fourth field, it will be our editions field. Just like the authors field, we notice that one book can have multiple editions, so it is not a one-to-one relationship. But unlike the authors field, one edition is unique to one book, i.e. the editions cannot be shared among multiple books. So here, instead of a many-to-many relationship, what we have is a one-to-many relationship where one book has many editions, but one edition is only related to one book. So let's note down that relationship, and it will be helpful in the later step. As for the publisher and publish dates fields for our books, we no longer need to care about these since we have previously grouped it together with our editions. So now, these have been moved to our editions table and is no longer inside our books table, so we no longer have to care about this. And this also shows why it's so important to sort of organize your data by grouping related data together first before we sort of figure out the relationships between them. And last but not least is the language fields of our book. So we know that the language field is not unique to each book. However, it would actually not make much practical sense to create a separate table storing only a single language column. So instead, we can just store the language together in the books table to make it much simpler overall. So here we can see how the architecture rules are not set in stone, and we can also try to be flexible by using our common sense as well. Alright, so now we know all the relationships between our data. Books has many-to-many relationship with our authors table, and a one-to-many relationship with our editions table. So now that we have defined our relationships, let's move on to the fifth and final step of this process, which is to actually create our tables. So first, let's start off with our books table over here. Our books table should have an ID column which acts as a primary key for each row. Next is the title column for our book, followed by the ISBN number for our book, as well as the language column over here for each book. Next is our editions table, which likewise will have an ID column as a primary key, an edition number, a publisher, a publish date, and unlike the book column, it will have a book ID column over here, which serves as a foreign key relationship to our ID column in our books table. So this is the foreign key that references and links our editions table to our books table. Moving on to our authors table, it will likewise have an ID column which serves as the primary key. It will have the name of the author, the country of the author, as well as the birth date of the author. And since our books table and authors table has a many-to-many relationship, we need to create one additional intermediate table or a join table between our books and authors table. So this books underscore authors underscore relation table will serve as that link for our many-to-many relationship. And in this table, it will have firstly an ID column as a primary key. So intermediate tables also need to have a primary key, take note of that. And now it will have an author ID foreign key relation to our authors table over here. And the third column over here is a book ID foreign key relation to our books table over here. So this books authors relation table is what will store the relationship between our books and authors tables. And there you have it. These are the 5 simple steps that we need to take whenever we are trying to design some relational database architecture. But what theory without practice? So in the third and final video of this video series, we'll be using what we have learned in the past 2 videos to actually create our tables in Supabase and link it together with our FlutterFlow app as well. So I hope you are excited for that, and I'll see you in the next video.